Hi, my name is Jason Ross. I work with the LaRouche basement research team. I was going to talk about metaphor, which artificial intelligence will never understand. But we're going to get into what metaphor is, but hopefully I'm going to get across what the key is to scientific thinking as opposed to the way a computer might think. Because there's some things computers can figure out. You know, I've seen they make this new vacuum cleaner that's a little circle that moves around on your carpet all by itself. So that's something, you know, a computer can figure that out. You know, they have automated car washes. You know, there's things like that. But there's some things a computer can't do. So, okay, so first I want to talk about what makes us unique as a species, totally unlike anything else in life. Then talk about metaphor, and then get at what the point of all this is. So for starters, here's a chart that, okay, even if this title up top didn't say it, this is a population chart. So the years go back to, 100,000 BC or so.
You can't see anything.
Here they're at 400 BC, and then here's almost the present, 1975. And this is population. So you can see it's going up. Now, this pretty much only could have been the human species. Or what other species might it have been that went from this level of, maybe 10 on this scale to 2,500 years ago, up to now a level of 650. I think this might just be European population. But can anybody think of a species besides people that might have that kind of growth? Rabbits? That's it? Bacteria? Well, here, yeah, maybe domestic animals along with people. Well, rabbits, see, the thing is, rabbits didn't first come into being in 400 BC. I mean, if you had a particular batch of rabbits, it might do this. But if we just said all rabbits in the world, maybe if rabbits had just come into being, maybe a new species that was just able to, maybe some kind of plant that was able to move onto land. When plants came out of water onto land, you might see this kind of growth. But other than a new species coming into being, I can't tell what you said.
Molecular size.
Oh, tiny things? Yeah, maybe if something new was developed. But this is something that's basically unique to the human species. If you're looking at species that have existed this long, there's none that waited that much time to jump forward, except maybe cockroaches or domestic animals or, things that like to live with us. So it's, like house cats, they've shot up, Poodles. There probably wouldn't have been any of those in nature without people, right? So how is it that we do that? Because that's definitely unique to us. However, here's a chart that's about all life. So this is a total diversity and number of genera. Genera means that you've heard of genus and species. If you have more than one genus and you're trying to sound smart, you don't say genuses, you say genera. So that's what that word is. So general is opposed to specific, anyway. So here, again, this is millions of years. 540 million years of time. And we've seen the number of different kinds of genera shoot upwards. I think this is only water, marine life. Now, that does look like human life. But here you're looking at life as a whole. That overall life has become more complex. There's more variety. You also see some very significant drops here. Now, I don't think we've seen a drop that big in recent history in human population, although this is the sort of drop we're looking at right now if we have world thermonuclear war. Now, here's another comparison. This is a chart. It's a little funny to read. The purple part is animals that can't swim around. So like a barnacle is only water, marine animals. Like a barnacle or a sponge or maybe like a tube worm, I don't think they can move, or things like that. And then the green part is, fish and things that are able to move around. So from 540 million years ago, very few things could move. So if you lived in the ocean, I hope you like where you live because you can't go anywhere else. Now today, what is this number? About 25%. Today, 75% of living things in the ocean are able to move. We've got lots more fish, and the number of sponges that are still doing their job being sponges and barnacles and things like that, it's much less of a portion of it. It wasn't a continuous drop, though. You can see how there are these, it's almost like walking up steps. Yeah, so it's almost like this is a sort of stage where there's a certain ratio of free moving and stationary life. Here we have a different stage, and here yet another one. So that if you think about what LaRouche talks about economic platforms, that if you want to look at the economy, instead of looking at all the individual things in it, look at what's the whole platform. What is mankind standing on? What are we able to do? When we discovered that germs cause diseases, that increased what we're able to do. Now you actually know that you ought to, sterilize your surgical equipment between patients, for example. Wash your hands. Yeah, that's a much more common thing, right? Wash your hands. Some people haven't gotten that one yet. Wash your hands. When you sneeze, try to keep it somewhere, cover your cough. Those things help. Or electricity, or development of agriculture. If you're only catching fish and walking around looking for berries, how many people can you support? Compare that to if you're saying, why don't I plant this seed, and then I know where I'm going to find my berries or wheat or corn or whatever you're planting. So these kinds of changes that we do as one species, in life, you have to look at all of life. You got to look at evolution. It's much bigger. Now, here's another one. Okay, anyway. Now, if we specifically look at one of the factors that increases our ability to do things, it's fire. Now, fire doesn't just make food taste better. Well, that's one of its purposes. It's got many. You can do a lot of things with fire. And you can do a whole lot more things when that fire is burning coal instead of wood. Can anybody think of why it's better to burn coal than wood? How that helps? Mm-hmm. Sure does. It's a lot easier to carry it around. That's true. It's a lot denser. Yep. Petroleum, even denser. This leaves out some, like charcoal in between wood and coal, or producing coke. People say that even if we had a nuclear, like most of our power was made by a nuclear process, for production of steel, you would still want coke, which is something you do with coal. You make coke. Because it burns so hot, you would still need that in the steel production. So you just look, these numbers, then they really shoot up once you get fission, uranium, which is our current nuclear plants. Deuterium, this is fusion. So we've only seen that in tested bombs so far, unfortunately, and on a small scale in test fusion facilities where we are able to create fusion. And then antimatter. So just look at the game we've gone from wood to petroleum. 3 times more energy in the same weight of substance. And then compare that to deuterium. 10 million times more. 10 million times more. And people have probably seen those demonstrations where a piece of uranium fuel the size of the tip of your pinky is the same as 1,000 barrels of oil or whatnot in terms of a power plant. That's uranium. When fusion's 1,000 times more energy dense than that. So just imagine what we'll be able to do with that. Be able to take a rocket and go to Mars and be able to have your foot on the gas pedal the whole way. Right now, the plans to go to Mars, you launch, and then you just sort of coast until you get to Mars, and then you hope nothing broke. And then you have to wait there for a few months. Well, hopefully you wanted to go there, so you spend a few months there, you're enjoying your trip on Mars, hopefully nothing breaks, because if it does, you can't leave until your specific launch window, and then you launch off and you have to wait until you get back to the Earth. That's using, these kinds of energy sources. With fusion rockets, we could actually just fly to Mars and it would just take a week. If something goes wrong or somebody gets sick, you could bring them back to Earth. You wouldn't just say, well, I'm sorry, I guess we won't let people with bad health go to Mars anymore. We'll have more stringent screenings. No. That's where we're going to move. But, okay, now let's, how do we do all of this? What is it that human beings do that lets them have these kinds of things where animals don't? Because animals, they don't change their relationship to nature. Sometimes, maybe your domestic animal will get you to help change its relationship to nature. Your dog sounds hungry, or your cat's purring and rubbing against your leg, maybe you'll give it some food, and it didn't have to go out and find it itself. But animals don't develop new sorts of fire. They don't use fire at all. Unless spy, yeah, they don't use fire. Okay, so metaphor. This is the main subject here. Who's heard the word metaphor before? Now, does anybody remember what are some things people heard metaphor means?
A comparison does not use like or as.
Okay. That's what I heard too. Okay, any other ones? Anyone? That's what we all got in school. A comparison that does not use like. When it uses like or as, what's it called?
Simile.
All right. Get a sticker on the board right here. Now, Mr. LaRouche says, no, there's a little bit more you got to have a metaphor. You know, a metaphor is a comparison, and with this sort of school definition, it doesn't convey the same sort of importance that, here's what LaRouche says. He says that metaphor doesn't relate to a particular explicitly direct object or set of objects. It refers to an implied simultaneity among a very special quality of several indirectly related objects. I know that's a mouthful. I think some examples will help make this clear. The point I want to drive at is that metaphor is a means by which we create new ideas that don't have any reference to what we've seen before. Sometimes when you get a new thought, when somebody gets a new idea, there's something in your mind now that wasn't there before. You might know the steps that helped you get to it, but as we're going to see when we go through how Kepler made his discovery, you've created something new that you didn't have before, that a computer couldn't have arrived at from what was already existent. It's really something new. How do you make something that's really new? It's not just comparing things that already exist, unless it's in a way that shows that there's something else there that couldn't have existed before. Okay, let's get into it. So first off, and if you've seen these before, don't spoil it. Okay, I've got a mystery object. I've got a square screen, and I've got a mystery object behind it that's moving around. So you can try and guess. Did everybody see that? It's gray on gray, so it's kind of hard to see. But you see how there's this shape here? It's a very simple shape. Okay. So there's something behind the screen. Think silently to yourself, what's probably behind the screen? If I pull it away, what will I see? Just imagine that in your head. Here's another object. Behind another screen. It's moving around. You can kind of guess. You can think what might be behind it. Okay. All right. What if those were actually the same object? What could it have been? What could look like both of these different things? Ooh. It was a cylinder. Right? Now, if you just saw one of the views or the other one, you would say, oh, it's a pizza box, or maybe you'd say it's a basketball or something. When you put the two together, you're able to figure something out that just one of the views wouldn't have told you. And maybe you could have guessed, without giving it away, what looks like a circle on one side and a square on the other. Maybe you could have guessed, if you tried for a while and it didn't, just show you in 10 seconds, probably would have guessed a cylinder. Let's take another look at this, about what it means to combine two different perceptions to get something new. We're going to look at the work of Johannes Kepler, who was the first modern scientist. He was an astronomer in particular, and he was the first person to bring physics into astronomy. See, back then, people would write books where they would calculate whether the Earth went around the sun or the sun went around the Earth or various things like that. And they'd also write books where they said what the heavens were made out of. Like, are there spheres made out of glass that carry the planets around us? Are the stars bits of light poked in like a big sieve? Are they their own fires? What are they? Those were two completely different departments. You either were a mathematician who would write down where you would see the moon on a certain day, so you can do your horoscopes in advance and go on vacation, if that's what you do for a living. Or you would write about the physics behind it. But they were totally separate. Kepler said that was ridiculous, because if the planets moved, it was for a reason. So let's look at what he came into. So this is Ptolemy. Well, that's not actually him. This is a picture of how he thought things worked. People may have heard of him. He said that the Earth is in the middle of the universe, which is easy to see if you just go out and watch the stars one night. If you watch them one night, it seems like everything moves around the North Pole, and it looks like a big sphere, so obviously we're in the middle. Now he said, well, the sun goes around the Earth, not just every day, but during the year also. If you, I don't have a picture of this, but you know how there's the zodiac signs in the, in the newspaper or whatnot, and it says something about you that seems insightful but could have applied to anybody else also? Now, does anybody know what those signs mean? Like where why do they have the names that they do? Why is a certain date associated with a certain sign? Where did that even come from?
What is it like during each of the zodiacs? That's where the sun is, like during the year, like I guess whatever I'm believer or whatever about that. So like in the month of October, that's where the sun is. It's like the constellation.
It's a graph. They split up in 12 sections. So the Chinese zodiac for animals, or our Western civilization, Scorpio, Aries, Iris.
Yeah.
At the time he was born, where the sun directly meets, right exactly came out of birth at a certain time, the trajectory of the sun was at. And also the other planetary positions also affect our lives as well.
Right. And so, because when people look at, I mean, it's a lot easier to see, when you look at the moon, I mean, I don't know how much stargazing anybody here does, but if you look at the moon, you might say, oh, it's in a certain constellation. I know, it's kind of hard to see around here. But the moon, you say, oh, the moon, it's next to these stars. Okay, it's in this constellation. The moon is in Leo. Your zodiac sign is where the sun was when you were born. Obviously, you can't see the stars that the sun is near because it's bright. And when it rises, you can't see the stars anymore. But if you knew where all the stars were and you figured out how much they moved, you could figure out where the sun was. So that's the path that the sun makes, all the constellations that it goes through. Those are the signs of the zodiac. And so when you're seeing this picture here, this is the sun going through the different signs of the zodiac, which I don't know in order, so I'm not going to, it goes through Leo and then Scorpio and then Virgo, or whatever the right order would be. That's what you're seeing here. Mars also moves through the sky. It moves through basically the same 12 constellations that the sun does. So Ptolemy says, well, yeah, Mars goes around the Earth too, but sometimes it looks like it goes backwards. Let's watch where we see Mars. Look, it's moving counterclockwise, and then look what's happening right here. It looked like it went clockwise a little bit. Do you see that? Mars does that. Every 2 years, Mars, if you watch all the stars it's next to, and you watch it night after night, it's moving through the sky, and then it goes backwards, makes a loop-de-loop, and comes back. So Ptolemy said, well, if Mars just went around the Earth, it wouldn't go backwards. So Mars will go on another circle that goes around the Earth, and everybody's happy. So that's what Ptolemy said, in about 150 A.D. Copernicus. People have probably heard of Copernicus, right? Who's heard of Copernicus? Okay, well, yeah. He said that the Earth moves. He said that the sun is in the middle of everything. And here's the Earth, and here's Mars. And now, let's watch what happens when Earth passes Mars, because Earth's going around quicker. So the direction Mars appears to be, it's moving to the left. It's going through Virgo and Scorpio and Cancer and, whatever. And then, do you see how it went backwards a little bit? Yeah. So Copernicus said, my system's much better. First off, the sun is gigantic and it makes hot heat and light, and why couldn't it be in the middle of things? And you don't have to have that extra circle anymore. Now the planets all go backwards, not because they go backwards, but just because we walk faster than them. And it looks like they're going backwards, like someone on the street that you're passing. Now here's the next guy, Kepler's boss, for a little bit. His name was Tycho Brahe. He also had less circles than Ptolemy, but he said, okay, the Earth's in the middle, because it doesn't seem to move. The sun goes around the Earth, but the planets go around the sun. because that doesn't violate the Bible. So it's okay. The Earth's still still. And that was part of the thinking. And then we'll do things like this. This is Kepler's boss. Now here's the funny thing. A lot of people like Copernicus's theory, and they would use it when they did their calculations of where to find the planets, even though they thought he was completely wrong. They said there's no way the Earth moves. That's ridiculous. The Earth can't move. But they said, you know what? The way you laid out your formulas, it's easier for me to use. So I'll use your formulas, but Earth moving, ridiculous. If it moved, we'd all fall off of it. It's crazy. And in the book of Joshua, it says that the sun was made to stop, so that means the sun must move if it could have stopped. So therefore, it's in other examples from the Bible. I'm not trying to paint out the church as being an awful institution or anything, by the way. Okay. Anyway, so here's these guys. Here comes Kepler. Now, Kepler believes Copernicus is right, and he believes it for a different reason than Copernicus did, because he doesn't think that mathematics makes things happen. Right? Like, if you just go about your daily life, do you ever see mathematics making something occur? Like in the middle of a car engine, are there a bunch of square root symbols and things like that are making the pistons move up and down, or is it that there's actually gasoline catching fire, expanding, pushing it out, it's turning it? There's something real that's happening there. If you have mathematics isn't real. You use it to describe things, but it's never why something happens. That's why you say, why did it happen? There's a real cause for it. So Kepler said, duh, the sun's in the center, not just because it likes the view to watch all the planets. It's making them move. The motion is related to the sun. Planets move faster when they're near the sun. This is what Kepler thought, that the sun was physically making this happen. Now, even his good friends told him, I like your ideas about astronomy, but you got to really knock it off with this idea that the sun's making anything happen, because you're trying to bring physics into astronomy. They said, don't do that. That's ridiculous. Astronomy is about calculating. Physics, you can say all day what you think the heavens are made out of, but it doesn't really matter. That's just sort of chatting. But when it comes to calculating, just stick with the calculating. Don't bring in your physics nonsense. So this is the sort of atmosphere he was in. It was pretty hostile to the work he was trying to do, where even people who liked him and supported him still felt completely weirded out. But I'm sure that's not the word they'd use, but they were made very uneasy. They shuddered at the thought of something physical causing motion. So here's what Kepler does. First thing he does is he shows that these three guys aren't different at all. That if you just look at where will the Earth see the sun or Mars, they're all three the same thing. It's just you rearranged which point you're standing still on. You just rearranged your things mathematically, but nothing's really different. That was the first thing that he showed. Then he wanted to go in and show that there is a difference between... See, one thing I didn't say. Mars' orbit. Does anybody know what's at the center of Mars' orbit for Copernicus? What's right in the middle? Nougat? No, not the planet. The orbit. Mars moves the sun, right? No. Copernicus did not use the sun for anything. If you calculated anything about any of the planets and set up their orbits, the sun never has anything to do with any of them. Do you know what is in the middle? Copernicus says, you can't see the difference on this, but Copernicus says take the orbit of the Earth, find the middle of that circle, and that's what everything goes around. So even though Copernicus said the sun's in the middle, it's not. The Earth is still in the middle. The center of the Earth's orbit, that's what all the other planets go around. So Jupiter somehow has to know where the center of the orbit of the Earth is and go around that, even though the sun is 20 feet away. I mean, it's more than that, but it's basically, so Copernicus, he never really made the sun in the middle. Kepler showed that even though all three of these were equivalent, and you couldn't prove which was right based on doing observations, he did prove that if you use the real sun instead of the center of the Earth's orbit, that then there would be a difference, and that it was big enough one that if you calculated based on the real sun versus the fake sun, you could decide who was right. So Kepler decided to launch into, he said, all right, I'm going to do this. I'm going to use the real sun. I'm going to do it. And I'm still going to use the same techniques that these other guys did for starters. I won't bring in the physics yet. You told me you don't like physics? Fine. I'll use mathematics. We'll have it your way. He had a surprise in store for them. So here's what he did. Actually, can you turn the lights off for a second? I wanted to make fun of Ptolemy a little bit more. Okay, so here's Ptolemy's system. All the planets have these spheres that they're in, which are very faint. You can barely see them. It's like Mars is green for no good reason. And, you need this, now it's zooming in. Like you wrote. Anyway, so here's Mercury. Here's Venus. Here's the Sun. There's the Earth in the middle. So here's this whole, he's got this whole system. I wanted to do something fun with it, though. Here's the 3 outer planets, Saturn, Jupiter, Mars. I'm adjusting their epicycles, the extra circles, so that they're all the same size. I have to change the orbits to do that. You notice anything these 3 have in common?
Well, they're all rotating in the same way.
Right. Now I put in the sun. For Ptolemy, who said the Earth's in the middle, all of the planets move on little circles that are coordinated exactly with the sun. Now that might make you think maybe the sun has got something to do with these planets' motion, right? Nah, not him. Either that or he knew and he's doing this wrong on purpose. Now I want to take a look at Mercury and Venus. This is even more shocking. Let's zoom in. Let's take a look at Mercury and Venus. I want to make Mercury's orbit bigger. It doesn't change where I see it. I'm just going to make it bigger so it's the same size as Venus. We're getting there. Okay. The center of their epicycles is at exactly the same spot. It's the sun. So I didn't change Ptolemy's system. I just changed the relative sizes. It's equivalent to saying Mercury and Venus go around the sun. There's no way he didn't know that. But he still didn't talk about that. He went right ahead and he said the sun's in the middle of the Earth's at the middle of everything. He knew that. He's just a liar as far as I'm concerned. I mean, there's no way he didn't notice that. Okay, anyway. Anyway, enough of that. In fact, you could say if what's his name? Ptolemy lived on the moon, made of a lunatic model. Here you got the moon in the middle. You got the Earth going around the moon. You've got the sun going around the moon on a little epicycle, and you've got Mars on an epicycle on a thing that goes around the Earth, which goes around the moon. That's also completely equivalent. You can make up anything you want, and it's exactly, in other words, if you're just playing with math and lines, you're never really getting at the truth. This works just as well. You could do all the calculations saying everything went around the moon if you wanted to. So I'm just saying. All right. I forgot this, so there's no flash here. All right. Now, okay, so let's get into what Kepler's doing. First, he realized that using one sense isn't enough. I'll show you an example why. When we see the sun in a certain constellation, in its sign of the zodiac, the sun sees us in the opposite direction. So if you time out how long the seasons are, because the seasons are different lengths, and it changes over time. I forget what the exact numbers are right now, but like summer is 94 days and fall is 90. Those are the right numbers, but the wrong seasons. Anyway, only based on knowing a direction, you could say that the Earth moved on this orbit, or on this orbit, or you could say it moved on this orbit. They all have the right directions. There's no distances in astronomy. When you look up and see a star, you've got no idea how far away it is. Right? It could be a light hanging on somebody's porch or something, or across the, I don't know. You can't really tell. So what Kepler did is he decided to stand on Mars to take a second look at the Earth. So from the Earth, we see the sun and Mars. If we just imagine what they would have seen, we can imagine that the sun and Mars are watching us. Now, every Mars year, Mars is back where it used to be. It's been 1 year for Mars. So if you keep doing this, look, we're able to watch the Earth from the sun and Mars at the same time. We're able to really see what its orbit is. Kepler used this to figure out something about the Earth that I'm not going to get into right now, but it's really interesting. Okay. What if, so there we use the sun and Mars together to look at the Earth. Now let's get at the metaphor thing. What if we're combining something? What if we're making a comparison without using like or as, where we're also not able to bring the two things together? That sounded vague. Here we go. We'll see what I mean. I know it's like, what? Okay. Yeah. Now we're going to get into metaphor where we're going to combine two perceptions, but it won't resolve itself. With this one where the Sun and Mars are both watching the Earth, they both sort of see the Earth, you put it together, you find out where the Earth is. It's a great way of using two observations together, but it's not metaphor yet. The next example we'll look at when we combine two different ways of looking at something, and you can't resolve it. Where it's a puzzle that doesn't have an answer yet. That's the way you create a new idea. You've got a puzzle that doesn't yet have an answer yet in your mind, and you've got to think of something new on the spot. That's when you really get your juices going, right? So, okay, first off, here's another bit of math I got to show you. Ptolemy also realized that in addition to Mars going backwards sometimes, the amount that it went backwards would change around its orbit. So he brought in he broke the center in half, and he said, here's the center of motion, as opposed to the center of distances, which makes the circle of Mars. This equant, Mars looks like it's moving at a uniform speed around this point here. So these angles are all the same. They're all 45 degrees. Like these 8 spots of Mars, they'd all look like they're just as far apart from the equant's point of view. From the Sun's point of view, look, the angles are different. Mars definitely looks like it's farther apart here than these 2 spots. Even though the equant would say that these 2 spots are the same distance away as these 2 spots. What it means is that Mars looks like it moves fast here, and looks like it moves slow here. So I just wanted to bring that in, that Ptolemy uses this equant point. That's the math that Kepler's going to go with, because they said, don't bring in physics, use mathematics. He said, okay, I'll use this mathematical trick to make the planet change its speed, even though it would be much easier to just let the Sun make it go faster. But fine, have it your way. So let's see how he lets them have it their way. Next thing is that he has to make very special observations. When the Sun, Earth, and Mars are all lined up, then when we look at Mars, the Sun's looking over our shoulder. Right? Like they're all 3 in a line. So wherever we saw Mars, the Sun would have seen Mars in the same direction. So by taking these observations, it's like we're standing on the Sun. This is how Copernicus would say, let's remove the motion of the Earth. The Earth moves, and that makes the planets look like they're moving. Plus, they're also just moving. To separate those two things, let's only look at Mars when it's on a line. Sun, Earth, Mars. That way, where the Earth is doesn't matter. The Sun is watching Mars. Okay. So Kepler, he does it. He figures out the perfect way to make the model for Mars. He's like, all right, there's a certain distance between the Sun and the center of the circle. There's a certain distance between the center of the circle and the equant. And he tests it out, and it works absolutely perfectly. I mean, like, perfectly. The maximum error that this thing gets is so tiny that it's basically imperceptible. This is before telescopes. So everyone's making observations just with their eyes. And they're still able to be precise to a 60th of a degree. So you imagine you got 360 degrees, break that down to 1 degree, break that into 60 parts. That's how accurate Tycho Brahe's observations were just using his eye. He did it by having incredibly big protractors, basically, so that you could, that's what they were, like big protractor. Anyway, so Kepler's got this model. He calls it his vicarious hypothesis. What does vicarious mean? Living through someone else. Right. Kepler calls it his vicarious hypothesis because he thinks that whatever is really making the planets move, he's going to let it live through something else. Math. In other words, Kepler's just making it very clear, I don't really believe in this at all, okay? This is my vicarious hypothesis. Whatever's real, we're going to let it live through the equant point. Sounds like fun, living vicariously through a mathematical point, huh? Anyway, so Kepler makes this. It's great. It's perfect. But then he wants to check something out, because there's this distance here between the sun and the center of the Mars orbit. Right? I wonder if we need that open. Okay. All right, so we got this distance here. So, yep, okay, we got that distance there. Kepler wants to double check that distance, because this distance, he didn't measure how big Mars's orbit was or anything like that directly. He just figured, hey, if I put things here, the math works out great. It's not physics, it's just math so far. So now he's going to bring in something else. Instead of looking at the 12 signs of the zodiac, the 12 signs of the zodiac, they're all along what's called the ecliptic. It's like the equator of our Earth. The Earth moves around the sun, and so we see this ecliptic. We also have latitude. How far off the signs of the zodiac are you? What Kepler does is he uses these latitudes. Once this stops moving, I can show you. Instead of looking at them moving around the signs of the zodiac, if he looks at how far they go above or below it, he's able to measure the distance. Here's how he does it. Okay. So, actually I needed that triangle still there. Anyway, he does it with some trigonometry. Up and still move. Anyway, he could have done it. Well, there's a triangle there. You got the sun, you got the Earth, and you got Mars. And if there's a marker here, I'll do it. There isn't. Okay. It's fine. Anyway, once he gets them... Let me just show that again. When he's able to measure how far away is Mars from the sun when it's farthest from the sun, and how far is it when it's closest to the sun. And you can take those two and find the middle. And you can say, how far is that from the sun? So here's a 3D thing. So the Earth is moving right along the equator, the sun's equator, the ecliptic. So, boom, we know where the sun sees Mars, its angle. We know where we saw Mars. We know this angle. Anyway, so we get this distance, find the middle point, and then we get the distance there. So hopefully that, we can go through that in the Q&A if people want to get the details on that some more. Anyway, so he's got a distance that he measured very directly now. He knows how far the center of Mars's orbit is from the sun. Now let's compare that. It's bigger than what his model had before. The purple length is what he got that just worked perfectly. He said that worked, but it's just wrong. I know that the distance from the sun to the center of Mars' orbit, I know it's bigger. So why don't I adjust my model? Here he is, he's pulling that orange point out. So what if I pull the center of the orbit out to be where it's supposed to be? Is it still an okay model? It isn't. Look at these differences. See, here's where the sun saw Mars originally, on the vicarious hypothesis. And here along this peach point, that's when it's been adjusted to take into account the distance that he measured. 8 minutes. Kepler finds out that there's a difference there of 8 minutes between his perfect model that worked but had the wrong distance and his other model that has the right distance but now it doesn't work. So you either get the longitude along the 12 signs of the zodiac, you get them right with the red point, or you get the distance above and below the zodiac right with the peach-colored point. But if you get the distance above or below it right, then the distance along the zodiac's wrong by 8 minutes. You just can't have it both ways. Now, here it's like, remember when we saw that square and the circle, and they're both part of the cylinder? Here you've got one way of looking at it, longitudes, that's like a square. That's the red point. You got the other way of looking at it, the latitudes, like the circle behind the screen. But now when you try to put them together to make the cylinder, they don't work. You say there's one thing here. Mars is moving. There's one planet there. But when I look at it this way, I get one result. When I look at it this way, I get something else. And I just can't mash the two together. It doesn't work. Now, Kepler never wanted it to work. Because remember, he doesn't believe that a mathematical point makes anything happen. He doesn't believe that there's some guy with a calculator writing out sines and cosines that here in the empty space that makes Mars move. So he really wanted this to fail the whole time. Because his point was, he said, look, I did a better job than any of you guys have ever done. The red point did look perfect. I mean, it was as good as anybody's observations could have been. Ptolemy, he would be off by over a degree. Okay, so if you compare that to 1 or 2 minutes, 60th of a degree, Kepler's great. Even when it's 8 minutes off, even that is the best thing anybody's ever made, because he's using the real sun and not the center of the Earth's orbit. So if he was a lesser astronomer, if he didn't care, if he was just a mathematician, he'd say, good enough. We'll call it a day. We'll use the Peach point. It doesn't give me the longitude exactly right, but it gets the latitudes right. Good enough. Maybe I can go somewhere in the middle and sort of compromise here. But Kepler said, no, these 8 minutes are crucial to reform all of astronomy. He said the data's not wrong. His boss had these incredible protractors. He had great data. So if it's not the data, and it's not his math, he's like, he double-checked his math so many times. He didn't just make a mistake, He spent like a year doing this, making this model. He said, well, the only thing that could be wrong is what? The assumptions. 2 assumptions are made here. Planets move in circles. How do you know that? You don't. That was just an assumption. But there's some imaginary point that if it was watching the planet, it would look like it's always moving the same speed. How do you know that? That's an assumption. So Kepler showed that because everyone else before him, they were all doing this stuff. They were all doing this mathematical stuff. So Kepler is basically, he's just proven now, you have to give up mathematics. Planets don't move by mathematics. Stop trying. I just tried harder than any of you are ever going to try. I went through all this work. I did the best job ever. It just doesn't work. So quit. That's how he ends part 2 of his book, The New Astronomy. Part 3 of his book, he starts bringing in physics. He says, I think the sun is making the planets move. Let's start trying to work out how that would be. So he starts working out his thoughts on it, that if a planet's 10% closer to the sun, it'll go 10% faster, etc. And he starts playing with this. Eventually, when he pulls this towards the end and he figures everything out, he realizes the planets move in a way that, I don't have a picture of this, but as they move, they sweep out an equal area in equal amounts of time. That is, if you had a string attached to the planet, connected to the sun, and the planet moves, the amount of area that you'd shade in, that measures the time of the planet. They move that way, and they actually move in ellipses. And he didn't do that by trying out an ellipse. He's like, oh, forget the circle, let me try an ellipse. He wasn't going for an ellipse. He figured out the way the distances had to change. He had a hypothesis about the sun acting like a magnet. And then he said, whoa, this makes an ellipse. Anyway, just because people think maybe he just tried an ellipse, like he pulled it out of his shaped box. No, that's not what happened. So, okay, 8 minutes. Boom. So somebody, let me turn the lights back on now. Sometimes with the dark stuff. So you say, so how do we use our senses then? Kepler just showed us that our senses don't show us reality. If you just try to take the measurements that you measure and then try to build up how things work based on what you will see later, that doesn't work. The universe doesn't work in a way that you'll see things. It works because there's causes. So think about all of the senses that we have. We've got some that are built in. It's very convenient, right? We've got eyes, they're built in. We got skin, with all sorts of things in our skin, a whole bunch of different. It's kind of wrong. When you see you got 5 senses, right? You got sight, you got hearing, you got touch, you got smell, you've got taste. Think about how many things are involved in touch. You feel hot, you feel cold, you feel prickly, you feel soft, you feel vibrations. Anyway, we got the built-in senses, but they're not any better than anything we have outside. They're more convenient. But just because we can't see a magnetic field, does that mean magnets don't exist? I'm almost done. Okay. No, you don't see magnets. That doesn't mean that they don't exist. right? There's a lot of things that you don't smell. That doesn't mean that they don't exist, right? So when we use our senses, yeah, they're very handy. But so is an oscilloscope. So is a spectrometer. This is how we figured out what the stars are made out of. You look at the light coming from a star, pass it through a prism, and you see, whoa, this makes the same kinds of light as helium, which comes from the Greek word for sun, helos, right? Helios, right? So anyways, got to remember that we have these tools that are available to us, as well as the external ones. None of them really directly show us reality, and we shouldn't identify with our senses. They're convenient, but they're no better than other things. So in terms of okay, let's get to that. So in terms of how metaphor plays a role in everything, it's an approach to science that we need to bring back. Because a lot of what we've got right now is people get a whole bunch of data, and then they ask a computer, figure out what happened here. And the computer makes a big math formula, and it says this is what's happening. That's different than a poet creating a new idea. That's different than Kepler discovering universal gravitation. Totally new concept. No one had thought of that before. And it makes things happen. So for us, it's not just the way that we do science. It's not just the successful way to think. It's the purpose of being. I mean, when are we really most... Here's a funny thing. Because you might say, when are you really being yourself? There's a lot of ways you might answer that. You might say, if I had a lot of money and I could do whatever I wanted to the rest of my life, what would I want to do? Is that being yourself? Good. Right. You're probably going to be something bad if you just, anyway. Or you might say, you might just say, well, can I look inside can I find everything about myself by looking inside myself? Well, here's the thing, though. How do you respond to outside things? That's part of who you are, too. So you think about Kepler. I mean, he really engaged himself in this work. I mean, this was hard work. He was not getting paid for doing a lot of it. Well, I mean, for some parts of it, but he died trying to collect a backdated paycheck that he'd never received, and he was went to go collect it, and he died on the way in a swamp or something. I mean, it was rough for him. What was driving him to do this? And you think, who is this man? Who is he really? Yeah, there's an approach inside of him, but what brings it out? It wasn't just introspection. And there's a role for introspection. But he got to find out what his mind was capable of when he engaged it in something outside. Now, the biggest goal, the main point for us as people, the main thing we need to do with culture to make it a good culture is expose people to that aspect of themselves. That's the point of being human. You see things like when Curiosity landed. And people who'd never even heard of Curiosity 3 months before, they still got really excited about it because we did this awesome thing. So let me just say this thing to finish up then, is that when it comes to how are you growing your economy, there are the nuts and bolts that you need. We need to have enough food. We need to stop turning food into gasoline. We need to build Nawapa. We need to have enough water. We need power. We need to pass Glass-Steagall. We need these things. They're absolutely essential. We've got to remember that the source of economic growth is the mind's ability to think. And we've got to foster a society where you might say the highest role of government is to allow people to play a role in their lives in something that's way beyond what they do with their personal lives. That goes way beyond their death. We say, hey, the point of government, it's not just to make sure that you don't have to pay too much to ride the subway. It's, are you going to be able to look back at the end of your life and say you did something that was essential? You did something important. Is the government, do we have projects that people can participate in and feel that way? We have in the past. Right now, we don't. So these things, they're not just a mission to create economic growth, although they will. The space program will create all sorts of economic growth if we really launch it. NWOP will create all sorts of economic growth if we really launch it. And then think about the cultural aspect of it as well. What does that let people reflect on themselves as being? And how does that differ from what you get if you're told that really there's too many people and you are your carbon footprint and you might as well just go kill yourself as long as it doesn't create any carbon? I mean, that's a disgusting thing, and that's this like outlook that's taught everywhere. You get in school and places. Oh, well, let's take our environmental studies or whatnot. Okay, you suck, you're awful, you're destroying the earth, you really should be dead, but instead just don't use styrofoam. That's a compromise. We'll let you stay alive as long as you don't use a styrofoam cup and you fix your toilet when it leaks. Otherwise, we're going to, gas you or something. Anyway, so, okay, that's what I wanted to say. And now we can talk about it. So,
succession of developments from this point, from Kepler's discoveries.
okay, that is a great question about what's the next stage here, because we've got what Kepler's done. What are we going to do now to move forward in our understanding of the heavenly bodies? Where are we going to go from now? So, I guess there's two things, on the heavenly body aspect and then on a different one, on quantum stuff, which I think would be really an exciting place that gets along this, is that in terms of the heavens, I mean, one of the big things is the Crab Nebula. It's the weirdest thing in astronomy. Some people say that there's two branches to astronomy, the Crab Nebula and everything else. It's this thing, it appeared a few hundred years ago. Well, we saw its appearance a few hundred years ago. It was recorded by Chinese astronomers. It is the most bizarre thing. I mean, if all of our physics today were right, it would be emitting the most powerful energy anywhere in the universe that we know of. I wish I had pictures of this. It's zapping us all the time. It's undulating in a way that seems to be coordinated faster than the speed of light. It looks one way in a radio telescope. It looks different in an X-ray telescope. It looks different in visual light. It's a complete anomaly. And really, to figure it out, we're going to make discoveries. We're going to have to make new ideas about what makes the universe run. So I think that's the most exciting thing on the heavenly bodies front. On the other, if you just ask me anything, I would say that studying quantum processes in the brain. Because, okay, in terms of quantum mechanics, people maybe have heard about quantum. There's this thing called the wave-particle duality, where, okay, light. Isaac Newton said that light was a bunch of little balls that get shot out of a candle and hit your eye, and then you feel it, and that's what light is. That's not true. Well, okay, not quite true. What happened is Huygens had discovered, he had hypothesized that light's actually a wave. And that, you can actually do these things, these experiments with little tanks with water in them. He said that light's actually a wave, and he was able to explain, how light bends when it goes in through water that way. And very importantly, he was able to explain this is something that nobody could explain. Let's draw it real quick here. If I take light, if I shine a flashlight at a piece of paper and it's got two little holes in it, what would you expect to see on the other side of the piece of paper? Two little dots, right? Yeah, that's usually what you see. Unless the dots are really small, and if you got the light that's really a constant color like a laser, and you can do this real simple, just like the tip of a pin. You just shine a laser, maybe if someone has one, we can do it after. Shine a laser at the wall, because you got to get up close to see it. Just have someone midway through hold the tip of a pin in the middle of it, and then you look at what it looks like on the wall. You don't just see the shadow of the tip of the pin. You do, but you see waves around it. Where inside the darkness, you see little ridges of red. It's a red laser. And then outside of it also, you see little ridges of darkness. So if you were looking at the shadow and you tried to say, how big was that pin? Where does the pin end and the air begin? It's really hard to say because it sort of gets blurred. Now, there's no way you can explain that if light's just a bunch of little balls being shot out of a candle hitting your eye. But if light moves like a wave, it's easy to understand because you can that's what waves would do when waves cross and they build themselves up or negate themselves. You're able to do that. So everyone was saying, okay, so light seems to be a wave now. And that was the going theory until about 1900, when it was discovered that light also seemed to come in packets. Packets, quanta, in discrete units. That it wasn't just continuous, more or less, but that it was actually made of, in some way, individual pieces. So this has become sort of like the biggest conundrum for modern physics. Is light a wave or a particle? Then they say, electrons, you shoot them through two slits. They also make the interference bands. Electrons, we thought they were particles, and they move like waves. Is it a particle or is it a wave? Another perfect example of like Kepler. You look at it longitudes, you get one model. You look at it latitudes, you get a different model. What is it? It was physics. So there's something just totally missing on the quantum thing. What I think the problem is that everyone's trying to explain it in an abiotic setting. They're trying to say, let's do laboratory experiments with light and electrons and try to understand light and electrons. I don't think it's ever going to work because there's got to be room for something new to happen in life and definitely in reason. And so let me just say on the reasoning front, like we got brains, right? There's chemicals in our brains. They definitely do something. You know, that's why different drugs have different effects, for example. I mean, your brain is connected to your thoughts. How does it work the other way around? How do your thoughts influence your brain? Unless your thoughts are just a bunch of chemical signals. If that were, how would you ever how does a brain do things a computer can't? You know, the whole aspect of metaphor, the whole creation of new thoughts means that the brain isn't determined. In other words, there's free will, right? You're able to decide what do you want to do. If it was all chemicals just going on, if that was all there was, I mean, there are chemicals, but if that was all there was, where would free will be hiding? So I think if you look at some of these quantum phenomena, and you say, well, you could have a process that seems kind of random in the physics laboratory, but that uncertainty or that seeming randomness, as everybody calls it right now, you might find it's not that random if you're looking, I don't know how you're going to do this, looking at someone's brain in this way, but I just think you're going to have to find that in other words, that's a crack for the mind to actually have an influence that wouldn't contradict what seemed to already exist as rules of physics. And there have been things done on that in like with photosynthesis. I don't know too much about it, but I know that there's also that experiment with the DNA causing light to get polarized in a way that seemed like it would require this super strong magnet. I know that's a short summary of it, but anyway, I just think that no one's ever going to explain electrons and photons as electrons and photons. You got to say all matter could take part in life. It all could become part of thinking. So you got to start from the top. The ability to have free will and thought means that you're going to find its shadows as an ability in the smaller things too.
There's something a little off topic you're saying concerning the future, like we're at a dead end with technology, and now we have to create new ideas of ways for civilization. Mankind can continue. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I'm saying that. Well, I don't think. I think that sounds like something.
That's why I said a little off topic because you said with computers and
Oh.
our knowledge of physics.
Yeah.
And how we have to, for steps that we can look past the computer and just harness the power of the computer with the power of the mind to create a better world.
Yeah, we just got to think about things. And some of the best avenues that are definitely going to be surprising are things like going out to space, because we just always discover things when we do that. The Crab Nebula, I'd really be interested in this quantum stuff if that was really pursued outside of just abiotic, outside of just the physics laboratory.
The problem is now we have forces that are blocking the pathway.
Yes. This stuff's political. Culture is political. What people think science is very political. If you're able to control how people, not just what people think, but how people think they make new ideas, then you're able to control the kinds of thoughts they're going to be able to develop in themselves. So yeah, it's definitely a political thing. Like pushing Isaac Newton really hard and never teach anything about Kepler at all, that's political. You know, I mean these things, you know, let alone, you know, the big push on standardized tests and everything.
Just got a number of things you said, my mind went back there as far as the particle and wave nature of light. I mean, waves are ultimately created by endowing energy within any kind of a given medium, whether it's an intuitive ether or water or anything else. So ultimately, light, like a lot of other energy transfers, does have that dualistic particle-wave model to it. As far as limitation of computers, I mean, to this day, you can stump the most powerful computer with a simple phrase, "I'm a liar." It was true in a Star Trek episode 35 years ago. You're a liar, you can't be trusted. You're an honest man. Why would you say you're an honest man if you're a liar? The computer will crash. Understand that intuitively. But a human can't calculate ridiculous numbers like a computer can. So the very thing that empowers the computer also limits it with understanding phrases like this, like you and I would laugh at. Right. But at the same time, the things that give us power to laugh at stuff like that also limit us in something else. There is a branch of mathematics called Lie algebra, which says that multiplication is not commutative, like 1 times 2 is not equal to 2 times 1, and multiplying something by 0 does not give you 0.
But that's the area they're looking into to make computers more powerful today. I mean, that's just on some of the topics we talked
That's
about.
fine. Well, it's good to know if you're being attacked by a cyborg or something.
Sure, absolutely. You know, or that or an IRS agent.
Yeah. Hey, don't tell them that.
If you try to divide something by 0, you're going to crash. You can divide it in algebraic form by a minus b if a equals b, but you're still going to get a paradox that 1 plus 1 equals 3, which metaphorically in biology makes sense that parents breed an offspring. So these things do contradict and yet reassert each other at the same time.
Mhm.
Just on all the points you were mentioning.
Yeah. We.
I was here that looked
Right.
fantastic.
Mhm.
I thought about this stuff from different perspectives. But does it make sense?
I understand that you have to consider also in astronomy and in navigation, etc. You have to consider how you're making your observations. You can have the position of your observation thrown off if it's close to the horizon.
Mm-hmm.
And you have the curvature of the Earth's atmosphere, you have refraction. This can throw your position off.
That was one of the things that Kepler definitely
Also,
considered.
When they put the sun, in the middle, in the center, and determined that the Earth was what was moving and not the sun. Okay, that's when they were able to work out a distance of how far these planets were from, work out a ratio,
Mm-hmm.
and how long it took them to go. And when the planet was closest to the Earth, figuring the distance of Mars to the Sun approximately, work an equation, work a triangle by which they could work an equation and figure out the distance, take that distance and use it by timing it day by day.
Yeah, it could be. Because based
And
on
see
polar
if-
coordinates and S
See
equals
if
R
the
theta.
arc,
Yeah.
if the arc was the same on one end.
Well, let me respect. Yeah, that was Kepler's other. He had two main reasons for supporting Copernicanism.
Yeah.
I mean, besides the sort of its easier one, is that one was that it let the sun be the physical cause of motion, which he believed. The other one was that, yes, the distances. For Ptolemy, you don't really have relative distances of the planets. That's how I was able to adjust it until Mercury and Venus came together. Because as long as you're just making the whole orbit bigger or smaller along with the epicycle, you can't, as long as it's in the same position, you can't tell if it got farther away or not. With Copernicus, oh, it disappeared. The thing with Copernicus is that he gave very definite relative distances for the planets. And what that let Kepler got really excited about it because he said, why do we have the planets have the certain distances that they do instead of other distances? Why is there such a big gap between Mars and Jupiter? Why is the ratio between Jupiter and Saturn pretty much exactly the square root of 3? And with Copernicanism, you can ask those kinds of questions. With Ptolemy, you just can't go anywhere with it at all. So, yeah, that was the other aspect of it.
My question is, why did Kepler do what he did?
What drove him just as a man, as a person?
Yeah.
He wanted to, I mean, he thought that one of these things the introduction to his new astronomy, he goes through it. He says, let's take a look at these scriptural objections to the Earth moving. And he goes through it. And one of his points there is that, well, I hope I'm not putting his words into his mouth. He said, look, you want to talk about God's book? Well, we also have nature. That's God's book as well. And you have to, you find out what's there. But, I mean, he found that the most beautiful pursuit for a person to do was to discover how does everything around us work. And for him, it was like a religious devotion. It was like a form of worship, which it is. Because you think, why are things put together the way that they are? What is discovered here? So for him, the joy of, in his view, discovering what was God thinking. I mean, there is no greater joy for him than being able to answer that, and then the fact that he actually got somewhere with that. The fact that I can't even imagine how happy he must have been when he finished the harmonies and he was able to put the planets together based on music, and it all actually worked out incredibly well. I mean, he said, if God's waited this long for me to discover his thoughts, I don't mind if it takes my fellow human beings a few hundred years. That's fine with me. I'm glad that I did this. You know? Mm-hmm.
I came across a theory that matter could be like a standing wave, so it's trapped and it's resonating within other waves.
Mm-hmm.
So it exhibits the properties of particle. So it could just be it's a standing wave like an electron when you have reflected.
Yeah.
Reflected back on each other.
Yeah. No, I know. Well, I think that it's only a lot of these things are only going to get resolved when it gets into biology, when it gets outside of just the abiotic physics laboratory. Because it seems to me also a little bit like Ptolemy, Copernicus, and Brahe. Their systems, they're different. They're also in some way they're equivalent. Like they're all kind of the same way of saying. In other words, I think that the thing that'll be able to determine one versus another, I think that if we limit ourselves to abiotic examples, then we're really missing the opportunity, I think, finally get some closure on some of these things. Because the potential for... There's something hiding there. Because there's things that happen in life that don't happen in non-life, like chirality and things like this. Well, whatever those things are, they're still somehow in the non-living things without expressing themselves. The way you find out these characteristics of, say, an electron or whatnot means you have to look at them outside of just among other electrons, because they only express it when they're in life. So I mean, I know what you're talking about, because there's like Broglie's has this theory, Schrodinger has this theory, and I don't know. I mean, it could be that that'll actually get resolved, but I've got a hunch that if we would just sort of do some of these other experiments, which I'm not even quite sure what they would be, that it would be a real opportunity to get some totally different thoughts on it. Let me see it. No, you haven't asked. Huh?
Well, that's for why would we care about learning more about how the planets and other bodies in space move around? And, we know there are thousands of asteroids out around our solar system, and we have no clue what their path is, and we only know a small bit of what actually causes them to somehow change course and veer to Earth. We need to know as a species to understand better their orbits and stuff.
That's totally true. Actually, I should have said that to Daniel too, because that's one of the things that Lynn's been emphasizing. He said, well, you can look at if you look at the asteroids each as individuals, you're kind of missing something here, because they do actually operate as a system in some way, and that's really not being pursued very much. So if you can get past their individual rocks to like what's going on as a whole with the asteroid belt as a thing. Of course, I'm sorry, these ones aren't in the main asteroid belt, but still. That's like a totally wide open field.
The asteroids came into the hole before they broke apart.
Well, and then also what they're doing right now. I mean, in other words, are they... I mean, beyond just like turning the clock backwards and like, oh, look, there was this planet, like two planets came from outside the solar system, ran into each other, and they made all, and then, okay, now that we know that, now we can go forward and we know everything that they're going to do in the future. The thing is, there's something else going on. Is there a way that they're interacting as a system right now that we're overlooking?
That could be true, because don't they say like Earth is millions, billions, trillions of years old, so,
A few billions, yeah.
So, that actually kind of makes sense to me in my head that you say that right now, but planets could crash into them.
Well, we definitely, one thing just to start with is looking for more of them. Is just looking for more of them. It's very tough to find some of these. Imagine if there's an asteroid that mostly is inside the Earth's orbit and then just barely peeks out to the distance of Earth and then goes back in towards Venus. It's hard to see. From here on the Earth, we mostly look outwards away from the sun. This is what happens when you look towards the sun. You can't see anything because the sun's there. It's very bright. So when we make discoveries of asteroids, it's in the outwards direction. So there's actually a group of private people who are concerned about the Earth being struck by an asteroid, and they're trying to raise private funds to send a satellite out into the orbit of Venus, so that since it's closer to the sun, when it's looking out, it'll be able to see some that might be threatening the Earth that we just won't see because the sun's in our way. So just like one thing is like, duh, send that up, and we shouldn't have to wait for private finding. It's like people have like these walks for various charities. It's like, look, I'm sorry, look, that's just, the government needs to invest in figuring out what's going on with cancer and AIDS. It shouldn't rely on paying someone else to walk. That's just kind of stupid. Frank, you had a...
Yeah, this has a similar flavor to the whole party politics problem. But I mean, right now, we've developed a bunch of weapons that a bunch of different nations have that can destroy the planet several thousand times over. It becomes pretty obvious that becomes obsolete when a big rock is hurling toward the earth and we have no idea how to do it. That we're not 40 different nations fighting each other, but we now become one species. You guys were just in, I think you and Ben were in the Ukraine. You just did a video presentation for another one of these Ukrainian groups. What are the prospects for more of this cooperation? I mean, especially coming out of what happens in the election. Everybody that's looking to America, some of the smarter people, the scientific players, big mob and stuff, they're all looking to land. Waiting for a LaRouche America, a Roosevelt America. So what's the prospect in the next? I don't know what else is in the works, I guess I'm asking.
Well, I mean, on its own, the prospect is bad. I mean, it's a tough thing because it's tough to take yourself out of it. So let's look at the opportunity. I mean, there's plenty of great opportunity if we get our act together here. I can say that. I mean, it's because these things are developed, and IGMOS has been around for years, and there is definitely a collection among nations, both through the IGMOS and then also through the United Nations, on working together on space-related threats. Some of the difficulty is that obviously a lot of these things are going to involve high technologies or advanced technologies, which nations are very cagey about sharing. I mean, right now, if a Chinese, space worker comes to the U.S., a NASA employee can't even take him out for a cup of coffee. That's against the rules on technology sharing and, helping the enemy or whatnot. So, a lot of this stuff, it's really easy to get going. They've done a lot of the planning about how nations would share data. They've sort of set up some centers about what kind of data do we want. They're already working on predicting earthquakes. I mean, this is already happening. In particular, some of these Russian scientists who are using data from satellites and others as precursors for earthquakes, they're already doing that. With more staffing, they say with not much more equipment, mostly he just needs staffing, they could start doing worldwide earthquake forecasting. So it's really up to us to turn around this, shrinking of NASA's budget and invest, because, I mean, something that could destroy the Earth could easily be found next week that's going to hit us in 2 months. If that happens in a week, what are we going to be able to do about it? Call Bruce Willis. There might be a plan B we're interested in too, What's that?
The USA is our own worst enemy.
No, we're not acting in our interest, that's for sure. That's for sure. I'm like, at this conference, it was mostly Russians and Ukrainians were there. Ben and I were the only 2 Americans there. And this is the international conference on protecting the Earth from things hitting it. Where's NASA? And part of it is that, NASA's if the Russians are starting that, we're going to do it ourselves. That's sort of That's sort of what they were saying, if NASA wants to do it, they'll just do that themselves. It's overlooking an opportunity for collaboration. But you look at it's part of this whole thing. I mean, look, we got these anti-missile systems surrounding Russia right now. I mean, this is pissing them off. I mean, look, even if Iran makes a cartoon missile to launch their cartoon bomb, you still say, what? Okay, so Iran's going to make one nuclear bomb, one missile. They're going to launch it against Israel and then be completely demolished. I mean, would they really do that? Is that in their interest? This nation of tens of millions of people is going to throw away their future and their families and all this to be able to send one missile? It's ridiculous. So this whole anti-missile system that the U.S. is placing in Eastern Europe, Russia knows who that's targeted at. It's not at the missiles Iran doesn't have. It's at Russia. And they've demonstrated that, the missiles based around Moscow, these things, that the U.S. would be able to intercept those missiles. Now, why is that important? The whole idea of preventing nuclear war is this mutually assured destruction idea. Doesn't that sound cheery? Mutually assured destruction. It stands for, MAD. That's what it stands for. The idea is that, from the Cold War, the West's got these weapons, the Soviet Union's got them. Hey, I got a great way to prevent nuclear war. Let's just agree that if you launch any missiles, we'll completely blow you up, and if we do that, you'll do the same for us. and then we're safe, right? Now, it sounds stupid, but what would be even worse is if the U.S., if we're setting up this anti-missile system, if we're able to block the Russian missiles, then they're wide open to being attacked. Now, they're not going to say, would the U.S. do that? Would it not? They have to defend themselves as a country. So, you know, they've said, look, if you continue with this, we're ready to put missiles in Kaliningrad. And they said, if political means don't work, we'll have to employ technical means, meaning missiles, and you won't like it. So you can see there's a lot of difficulties for U.S.-Russian collaboration on things that would involve, you know, defense-related technologies. But it is the sort of thing that should be able to pull us all together, because it's like, I mean, you know, this asteroid isn't going to care what country it hits. It's not going to say, it's not going to come and say, whoa, 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 that's a NATO country. Hold on, let's back up. All right, bam, we got him.
As hard as this might sound, this is sort of like a scenario from that Bruce Willis film that the only thing that pulled the nations together was an oversized asteroid that was headed for the Earth and burn up in the atmosphere. Yeah, because there's a lot of money to be made in the Cold War and the arms race that's never meant to end nor be won. I mean, it's been going on for years, and right now it's heating up again.
I mean, it's an opportunity we should take, because here's the thing, is like, you do have to be ready for it. Like, I'm serious, like, if we discover it next week, I think we're just going to be screwed. And that's going to be like the worst 2 months ever. Because everyone's going to know, you know what? In 2 months, this thing is going to hit us. We're working as hard as we can. You know, whoops, you know, hey, you know, they're moving the space shuttle 3 miles an hour to get it out of, you know, wherever they took it to try to get it ready to launch again or something. Like, oh, it'll take us a month to get it put back together. You know, you're not going to be able to do anything about it, you know. So you have to be ready. What's that? Hitting the Earth? Yeah. Well, you see, the thing is, well, it came close. I mean, it was between the moon and the Earth. It's pretty close. Now, I mean, every about 100 years, one of them as large as the biggest nuclear bomb ever tested hits the Earth. So, you know, the last one is thought to have hit in Siberia about 100 years ago. I don't mean like clockwork, like every 100 years, but just based on how many there are in our orbit, they're able to calculate it out. Now, in the past, maybe we've been lucky and they've hit water or, you know, Antarctica or someplace no one really noticed it. But the amount of destruction that this one in the early 1900s caused in Siberia, it would be like, it would destroy New York City, like just completely, if it hit right in the middle here. So, yes, that sort of thing is estimated to happen about every 100 years. You don't know when in the 100 years, but you're just saying it's about that frequent. In other words, it's not like, oh yeah, don't worry, the dinosaurs took it, we're safe, you know. Maybe, yeah. Well.
I was going to say the periodicity of asteroids striking the Earth comes from the theory of a massive word cloud being out, where a comet makes it 35 million.
Yeah, and then let alone the comets. Most of these estimates are only asteroids. You're right. I mean, these comets go out to like, you know, 10s, 20, 100 times the distance of Pluto. They've got these incredibly long orbits, or it might be like, you know, millions of years. So they're spending most of their time way out there. Now imagine, you're way out here 10 times past Pluto, and you got the sun pulling on you the whole time you're coming in. How fast do you think you're going to be going by the time you get near our orbit? So, you know, comets, yeah, they go much faster than asteroids. You can have much less warning of them as well.
Well, that's where the destructive power comes from, because kinetic energy is 1/2 mv squared, even if it has a relatively small mass, but it's going at 50,000, 60,000 kilometers per hour. Even a small comet can
or per second.
More power
Yeah.
than a nuclear bomb.
Yes, absolutely. And it's very hard to see them in advance.
That's the real danger.
Yeah. So, yeah, those estimates don't even include comets and how often they might be hitting us. So it's just insane. Basically, we know something's going to hit us. We know we're not prepared right now. We know some of the basic things we could even do, and then some of the more difficult ones of, like, you know, doing some tests out there. You know, move some asteroid out of its orbit. You know, let's start doing some tests with things like that. Fly up there and, you know, I mean, obviously the most effective thing is to ignite a nuclear bomb in it. Test it out, you know. That you have to do with the international cooperation, obviously. Because, like, oh, yeah, we're just testing a nuclear bomb in a space rocket. Don't worry, you know. Obviously, you have to be on the same page in doing tests like that. I mean, it's currently illegal to do anything nuclear up there. So, yeah, so you would have to get together. And I mean, obviously, if something's coming, no one's going to care. But, yeah, people do have to get together and work on this.